contract so large it doesn't just rewrite the record books, it sets them on fire. We're not talking about a modest bump in pay. We're not talking about a respectable raise for a standout rookie season. The number sitting on Caitlin Clark's table right now from a European basketball organization is the kind of figure that makes every WNBA veteran's jaw tighten the moment they hear it, because it doesn't just make her the highest paid player in that league. It makes her the highest paid women's basketball player anywhere on the planet. Let that breathe for a second. A player who hasn't even completed her second professional season. Higher paid than decorated veterans. Higher paid than multiple MVP winners. Higher paid than women who have spent a decade grinding through bus rides, half-empty arenas, and league minimum contracts while preaching patience to anyone who would listen. Here's what nobody is saying loudly enough. This isn't an accident. The global market doesn't throw generational money at sentiment. It doesn't reward loyalty or longevity or years of quiet dedication. It follows one thing and one thing only: attention. And right now, Caitlin Clark commands more attention in women's basketball than every other player in the sport combined. Not slightly more. Not marginally more. More by a distance so vast it has fundamentally changed the financial conversation for every woman who will ever lace up sneakers professionally. Not only did her college championship game pull nearly 20 million viewers, more than the MLB World Series, but her WNBA debut shattered the league's single-game viewership record within the first quarter. 2 records. 2 different levels of the sport. Same player. Game over. So why, instead of celebration, did the announcement trigger something closer to a league-wide eruption? Because the money doesn't lie, and some people in that locker room really, truly wish it would. Picture this. You are the most watched athlete in your sport. Sold-out arenas follow you city to city. Your jersey sells out within hours of a new colorway dropping. Brands are lining up. Cameras track your every movement. And yet, inside the league that benefits most from your existence, the environment feels less like a professional workplace and more like a pressure cooker with a cracked lid. That is not a hypothetical. That is Caitlin Clark's documented reality heading into this decision. European basketball leagues, particularly the elite-tier organizations that have now entered this conversation, operate with a fundamentally different philosophy toward marquee talent. Stars are protected. Stars are marketed. Stars are treated as investments rather than inconveniences. The infrastructure surrounding top players abroad isn't just competitive. In many cases it is superior in terms of treatment, facilities, and organizational loyalty to the player rather than around them. Here is the part the outrage crowd conveniently glosses over every time this topic surfaces. Clark going to Europe wouldn't just benefit Clark. It would send a seismic signal to every league, every front office, and every collective bargaining negotiation that follows. When the biggest name in your sport can be lured away by better pay and better conditions, you have a structural problem, not a personnel one. Her leaving would force a reckoning the WNBA has successfully avoided for years. She built her brand from a mid-sized college town in Iowa. She turned a university gymnasium into a national event. She made casual sports fans care deeply about a sport they had politely ignored for 2 decades. The European offer isn't just money. It's a mirror held up to every decision-maker in the WNBA asking one uncomfortable question. If you treated your biggest star this well, would she even be considering leaving? The answer echoing back from the locker rooms, the front offices, and the league's own silence is the loudest response of all. And the response from her peers? That's where this story stops being about basketball entirely. Most people assume the tension around Caitlin Clark is simple jealousy. A clean, uncomplicated emotion that's easy to diagnose and easy to dismiss. Veteran sees rookie getting paid more, veteran gets upset, story over. But that framing is doing something dangerous. It's letting the real problem hide in plain sight. This isn't jealousy. This is a culture war wearing a jersey. The WNBA locker room has operated for decades on an unspoken hierarchy. You pay dues. You wait your turn. You defer to the veterans who bled through the lean years when the league was barely surviving, when road trips meant commercial flights and middle seats and per diems that wouldn't cover dinner at a mid-range restaurant. That code isn't without merit. Those women did sacrifice. Those years were brutal. The respect owed to them is real and it is earned. But here is the collision nobody wants to acknowledge head-on. The survival of the league those veterans protected, the very existence of the WNBA in 2024 and beyond, now depends almost entirely on the cultural moment that one player from Iowa created almost overnight. League-wide attendance jumped double digits in markets where Clark appeared. Opposing team ticket sales spiked on the nights Indiana Fever was on the schedule, not because fans were coming to see the home team, but because they were coming to see her. Television partners started renegotiating conversations that had been dormant for years. According to sports industry analysts tracking the surge, WNBA merchandise revenue in Clark's debut season increased at a rate the league hadn't seen across its entire prior decade combined. One player, one season, one decade's worth of commercial momentum compressed into a single calendar year. Not only did the league's visibility explode, but the spike created real leverage in collective bargaining discussions that every single veteran player will directly benefit from. The veterans angry at Clark's European offer are, without realizing it, angry at the person most responsible for the financial ceiling they're about to break through. That contradiction should stop you cold. Because if the locker room understood that dynamic clearly, the reaction to her European offer wouldn't be bitterness. It would be panic. The kind that comes from realizing the person you pushed away was the one holding the door open for everyone behind her. And what happened the moment that door started to creak shut? The incident that changed the entire conversation and exposed everything wrong at once. There is a version of this story where what happened on the court stays on the court. Basketball is physical. Contact happens. Intent is murky. Reasonable people can disagree about whether a play was dirty or just aggressive, and professional athletes absorb that ambiguity as part of the job. That version of this story would have been uncomfortable but manageable. This is not that version. When DJ Carrington's fingers connected with Caitlin Clark's eye during that nationally televised game, the basketball part of the incident was almost immediately secondary. Clark visibly reacted. The arena went tense. And the moment it happened, the eyes of millions of viewers didn't just watch the play, they watched what came next. Who would respond? Who would check in? Who would say something? Who would say nothing? What followed wasn't silence. Silence would have been better. Carrington took to social media and constructed something calculated and deliberate. She mimicked Clark's voice in a mocking, sing-song tone, repeating the question Clark had reportedly asked, "Did you do it on purpose?" Over and over, as though a player asking about an eye injury was somehow embarrassing rather than completely reasonable. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment slip. It was a performance. Produced, posted, and allowed to sit there collecting engagement while the subject of it nursed a visible injury. Here is where the story fractures into something genuinely harder to process. Standing in that video, laughing alongside Carrington, was Nalissa Smith, Caitlin Clark's own Indiana Fever teammate. Not a rival. Not a stranger. The woman who shared a bench with her, a locker room with her, and a franchise identity with her. Laughing. On camera. Publicly. The Indiana Fever organization's response was swift, decisive, and completely unambiguous in its message to every player on that roster. They posted Nalissa Smith's season highlight reel. No statement. No defense of their franchise cornerstone. No accountability. A highlight reel, as though the previous 48 hours had simply not occurred in any documented reality. That institutional silence isn't just negligence. It's a choice. And choices like that have consequences that don't stay quiet forever. What is the actual cost of a teammate's loyalty? Not the locker room speech version. Not the post-game interview version where everyone talks about sisterhood and having each other's backs through everything. The real version. The version that gets tested not in a championship moment but in a quiet social media video at 2 in the morning when nobody powerful is watching. Because that test came. And the result is now permanently documented. Nalissa Smith had a choice in that moment that was genuinely simple. Not complicated. Not politically charged. Not requiring any deep strategic calculation. Her teammate, the woman whose name on the schedule fills the arena they both play in, had just been injured on a national broadcast. Another player was publicly mocking that injury online. All Smith had to do was nothing. Stay out of it. Scroll past. Let it be someone else's moment of pettiness without adding her face and her laugh to the frame. She didn't do nothing. She chose a side. Loudly, visibly, and on camera. Here is the dual reality that makes this specific betrayal cut deeper than the average locker room drama. Not only was Smith Clark's teammate, bound by professional obligation and basic workplace decency, but the woman she chose to stand beside in that video is her romantic partner. Which means Smith couldn't even separate personal loyalty from professional responsibility for long enough to protect a colleague from public humiliation. That's not a lapse in judgment. That is a statement about where Clark sits in the internal hierarchy of that locker room. And the Indiana Fever front office handed that statement a megaphone when they said absolutely nothing. Think about what that silence communicates to Clark specifically. The league won't protect you from dirty plays. Your own organization won't defend you publicly. Your teammate won't choose basic professional loyalty over a social media moment. The fans see it. The cameras see it. The European organizations making contract offers absolutely see it, and every piece of that picture makes their offer more attractive by exactly the same degree that it makes staying less rational. But here is the uncomfortable layer that almost nobody is willing to press on. Why is the league this quiet? Front offices don't accidentally stay silent about incidents involving their most commercially valuable players. Silence is a resource. Silence is deployed. So the question that should be making everyone in that league's executive structure deeply uncomfortable right now is this: who benefits from Caitlin Clark feeling isolated, undervalued, and one bad week away from boarding a flight to Europe? That question doesn't have a clean answer. And the fact that it doesn't is the most alarming part of this entire story. Midseat. If the way this league has handled its most valuable player genuinely surprised you, you already understand exactly why what happens next matters so much. Hit subscribe, because the second half of this story goes somewhere even the loudest voices in this conversation aren't ready to go yet. Don't miss it. Here is a reframe that is going to feel uncomfortable for both sides of this argument. Aya Wilson is not a villain in this story. Dismissing her frustration as pure pettiness or naked jealousy does something intellectually dishonest. It lets the actual problem walk out the back door while everyone argues about the wrong thing entirely. Aya Wilson is a symptom. The league is the disease. Consider what Wilson has actually delivered across her professional career. Multiple MVP awards. Championship rings. Defensive dominance at a level that draws legitimate comparisons to the greatest players this sport has ever produced. She has been, by virtually every measurable basketball standard, the best player in the WNBA for a sustained stretch of years. And during that entire period, those years of excellence, those seasons of historic individual performance, the league's commercial infrastructure never once mobilized around her the way it has mobilized around Clark in a single calendar year. That is not Wilson's failure. That is the league's failure. Loud and clear. But here is precisely where Wilson's frustration becomes misdirected in a way that ultimately damages her own legacy. She is pointing at Clark when she should be pointing at the boardroom. She is expressing resentment toward the player when she should be demanding accountability from the executives who spent a decade under-marketing the most dominant player they had. The anger is valid. The target is wrong. According to sports economists who study athlete valuation, popularity and performance have almost never moved in perfect parallel in professional sports. The most marketed athlete is rarely the most skilled one. It is consistently the most accessible one, the one whose story reaches people who don't already consider themselves fans of the sport. Clark's crossover appeal didn't diminish Wilson's greatness. It created a commercial environment where Wilson's greatness can finally be monetized at a level closer to what it actually deserves. Not only is Clark's European offer raising the global salary ceiling for every women's basketball player, but the incoming CBA negotiations are happening against a backdrop of record revenues that exist almost entirely because of the attention Clark generated. Wilson is positioned to sign the biggest contract of her career in the next negotiating window. The foundation under that contract was built, in significant part, by the rookie she has been publicly dismissive of. That is the twist the veteran class is not ready to absorb. And the league's executives know it. Which raises the question of why nobody in a position of authority is standing in front of a microphone and saying it plainly, because that explanation would cool half this conflict overnight. Unless, of course, keeping the conflict alive serves someone's interests more than resolving it does. Vivid scenario. Imagine you own a restaurant. 4 years, you've had a loyal, dedicated kitchen team producing genuinely excellent food. The critics who find you love you. The regulars keep coming back. But the dining room is never more than half full, the margins are punishing, and every month feels like a quiet negotiation with survival. Then one day a single dish hits the cultural moment perfectly, social media explodes, reservations flood in, the line wraps around the block. Do you resent the dish for outshining the rest of the menu? Or do you figure out how to make the entire menu benefit from the moment? The WNBA has been staring at that exact choice since Clark's rookie season began, and its response has been somewhere between ambivalent and actively self-destructive. The attendance data from the 2024 season is not subtle. It does not require interpretation or generous framing. Road game attendance for Indiana Fever matchups increased by figures that, in any other professional sports context, would trigger immediate and aggressive league-wide marketing campaigns built entirely around the player responsible. Venues that routinely operated at 60 or 70% capacity were suddenly selling out, and selling out fast, specifically on nights when Clark was on the visiting roster. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle every executive in that league's office. The spike wasn't uniform. It was specific. Fans were not suddenly becoming WNBA fans broadly. They were becoming Caitlin Clark fans who happened to be attending WNBA games. That distinction matters enormously, because it means the conversion of casual viewers into committed league followers depended entirely on how well the league treated, protected, and promoted the player who brought those viewers through the door. And the league handed those new fans a front-row seat to watching their reason for being there get poked in the eye, mocked online, and abandoned by her own organization without consequence. A commonly overlooked mistake in sports league management: confusing attendance momentum with loyalty momentum. They are not the same thing. Attendance spikes because of a singular attraction. Loyalty builds only if the experience around that attraction earns it. The WNBA captured the attendance. It is actively destroying the loyalty, one unanswered incident at a time. The front office's silence isn't just bad optics. It is a structural threat to the exact growth story the league has been celebrating in every press release since last spring. And someone in that building knows it. The question is whether they'll act before Clark stops waiting for them to. Bold claim incoming, and it is going to reframe everything you thought you understood about why the league has stayed so conspicuously silent through all of this. The WNBA front office is not indifferent to Caitlin Clark's situation. They are not distracted. They are not simply slow to respond in the way large organizations sometimes are when cultural moments move faster than internal communications departments. The silence is not negligence dressed up as bureaucracy. The silence is fear. Specific, calculated, institutional fear. Here is what the executive level of this league understands with absolute clarity that almost nobody in the public conversation is articulating. If they defend Clark loudly, if they issue statements, if they levy consequences against players who mock her, if they build visible organizational infrastructure around protecting their most valuable asset, they trigger a different crisis entirely. The veteran class, already simmering, reads that as the league officially choosing sides. The locker room dynamic that is currently in uncomfortable tension becomes an open fracture. Players who have legitimate grievances about years of undercompensation and undermarketing suddenly have a concrete moment of institutional favoritism to point at. The league is trapped between two catastrophic outcomes and has chosen the one that feels quieter in the short term. But here is the twist that reframes the entire picture, because this one changes the calculus completely. The WNBA's silence isn't protecting the league from Clark leaving. It is accelerating it. Every week that passes without a visible organizational response to her treatment is another week where the European offer looks more rational, more respectful, and more worthy of serious consideration. The front office is so afraid of the internal political cost of defending Clark that they are systematically destroying the external case for her staying. They are choosing a manageable internal conflict over an unmanageable external one, without fully reckoning with the fact that losing Clark doesn't resolve the internal conflict. It simply removes the only figure capable of generating enough commercial momentum to fund the solutions those veterans actually need. Think about what the precedent looks like if she goes. Not just for Clark. For the next transformational talent who enters this league. The message sent to every future crossover star, every player capable of bringing millions of new eyes to women's basketball, is precise and unmistakable. Come here, generate billions in cultural value, and we will watch quietly while the environment around you becomes professionally untenable. That message doesn't stay in a press release. It travels. It reaches agents. It reaches college coaches. It reaches the next Caitlin Clark while she is still deciding which path to take. According to analysts tracking women's sports investment trends, the current window of commercial momentum in the WNBA is historically fragile. Leagues that fail to convert cultural moments into structural loyalty almost universally see those moments dissolve within 2 to 3 seasons, leaving them worse off than before the surge because the expectations of sponsors and broadcast partners have now been permanently reset upward. The front office knows this window is closing. They know what's at stake, and they are still quiet. Which means the decision is rapidly shifting from Clark's hands into something larger, a reckoning the entire sport will feel regardless of which way she goes. And what that decision actually looks like up close, the real texture of what Clark is weighing right now, is something almost nobody has laid out honestly yet. There is a moment in every athlete's career that doesn't announce itself the way the big games do. No crowd noise. No broadcast countdown. No dramatic music swelling at exactly the right second. It arrives quietly, usually sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning, as a simple, clarifying question that refuses to be postponed any longer. Is this worth it? Caitlin Clark is sitting inside that moment right now. And the honest answer, the one stripped of loyalty narratives and league pride and the comfortable story about finishing what you started, is genuinely not obvious from the outside. Which makes it worth actually examining, because the people shouting the loudest about what she should do are almost universally the people with the least skin in the outcome. Consider what staying actually requires. It requires absorbing a professional environment where on-court targeting has become normalized specifically around her. It requires coexisting with teammates who have demonstrated, on camera, that their personal loyalties supersede professional ones when the two come into conflict. It requires trusting a front office that has now established a clear and documented pattern of institutional silence in the face of public incidents involving its franchise cornerstone. And it requires believing that the WNBA's next collective bargaining agreement will deliver financial compensation somewhere in the territory of what her global market value actually represents. That is not a small ask. That is an enormous act of faith directed at people who have not yet demonstrated they deserve it. Now consider what leaving actually costs. This is the part the pro-Europe argument tends to skip past too quickly, because the costs are real even if the case for leaving is compelling. Clark leaving the WNBA mid-momentum doesn't just affect her. It affects every young girl in America who found women's basketball through her specifically, who now associates the sport with her face, her name, her story. The cultural bridge she built between casual sports audiences and the WNBA is not a permanent structure. It requires ongoing presence to maintain. Her absence doesn't just create a gap in the Indiana Fever roster. It creates a gap in the narrative that an entire generation of new fans was just beginning to invest in emotionally. There is a mini-story buried inside this decision that almost nobody is telling. Think about the player who spent 4 years in Iowa City turning a college program into a national phenomenon. Not because the infrastructure was already there, but because she built it through sheer force of will, personality, and an almost supernatural ability to make millions of people feel personally connected to her journey. She didn't wait for the moment to be created. She created it. And the question now is whether that same force of will gets deployed inside a league that has repeatedly failed to protect her, or directed toward a fresh environment that is actively, aggressively, and publicly eager to have her. History offers an uncomfortable parallel here. When Sheryl Swoopes, the first signature athlete Nike ever endorsed in women's basketball, couldn't sustain commercial momentum into a second generation of fans, the conversation around women's basketball went quiet for years. Not because the talent disappeared. Because the crossover story lost its thread. The sport couldn't find its next entry point for casual audiences, and the commercial infrastructure that had briefly flourished quietly contracted back to its baseline. Clark is that entry point right now. The only one the sport has produced at this scale in a generation. And the WNBA is treating her like a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be protected. The decision on her table isn't just about money. It isn't just about respect. It is about whether the environment she stays in is capable of matching the scale of what she is still capable of building. Because that answer, right now, based on everything documented and visible and impossible to honestly dispute, is far from certain. And whatever she decides, the consequences ripple far beyond one player, one contract, and one league's uncomfortable summer. Some stories end with a winner and a loser. A clear verdict, a tidy resolution, a moment where the dust settles and everyone knows exactly what happened and why. This is not that kind of story. And anyone telling you it is, anyone packaging this situation into a clean narrative where one side is entirely right and the other is entirely wrong, is selling you something more comfortable than the truth. What this story actually is, stripped down to its foundations, is a stress test. A stress test of whether a professional sports league can survive the arrival of exactly the kind of transformational talent it always claimed to be waiting for. A stress test of whether veteran athletes can separate structural grievances from personal resentment long enough to recognize when both point at the same broken system. A stress test of whether institutional silence, deployed long enough, eventually becomes institutional policy, and what happens to the people caught inside that policy when they finally stop waiting for it to change. Caitlin Clark passed every test the basketball court put in front of her. Spectacularly, repeatedly, in front of audiences that kept getting larger. The tests she is failing are not basketball tests. They are human ones, the kind that ask whether a person can continue pouring energy into an environment that returns hostility where support should be, silence where accountability should be, and a highlight reel where a public defense should be. Here is what the past 12 months actually proved, woven together honestly. The global market values her at a level the domestic league hasn't matched financially or culturally. The veteran class's frustration, however misdirected, reflects a genuine structural failure that predates Clark by decades, and that her commercial surge is ironically positioned to fix, if the league doesn't destroy the momentum first. And the front office's silence, whatever its internal political logic, has communicated something to Clark, to her peers, and to every future talent evaluating this league that no press release can fully walk back. 3 facts, 1 pressure point, and a decision that hasn't been made yet, which means the outcome of this particular stress test is still genuinely open. The question worth sitting with, the one worth dropping in the comments right now, isn't whether Clark should stay or go. It is this: what would it actually take for the WNBA to become the kind of league that makes staying the obvious answer? Because that question, answered honestly, tells you everything about where women's professional basketball is headed, and everything about the distance between where it is right now and where it keeps insisting it wants to be. The next chapter of this story is coming faster than the league is prepared for. The contract offer has a window. Windows close. And when they do, the conversation shifts permanently from what could have been to what was allowed to happen. And those are very different conversations to be having on the other side of a decision this consequential. Whatever comes next, one thing is already beyond dispute. The sport will never be the same as it was before she arrived. The only question left is whether the people responsible for protecting that change were worthy of the moment it handed them. They still have time to answer that. Not much, but some.